So we are ready to get started. Again, everyone, good morning. Right now we're at about 25 participants. My name is Leslyn Angel. I am the president and CEO of MI-UCP, Michigan United Cerebral Palsy. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This is definitely new territory for us. Many of you may know that United Cerebral Palsy of Metro Detroit hosted an assistive technology conference for many years, actually for a total of 12 years. And unfortunately, due to the climate that we're living in, COVID, in May of 2020, we had to cancel, postpone our annual conference. And um, we figured out a way. We realized that again this year we would not be able to have a conference, but we really wanted to do something. We know that there is truly a need for information on technology and on education. And so we came up with the idea of hosting monthly talks. And so this is the first of a series of monthly AT talks that MI-UCP will be doing. Also during the pandemic, we had some major changes to occur within our organization. In July of 2020, United Cerebral Palsy of Metro Detroit and United Cerebral Palsy of Michigan merged to form Michigan United Cerebral Palsy, MI-UCP. And before we get started, I'd like to show you guys that video, but I have a couple of housekeeping things that I'd like to touch on first. There are opportunities to receive a certificate of attendance. And if you would like a certificate of attendance, please email me at langel@mi-ucp.org. Again, that's langel@mi-ucp.org. In addition to the certificate of participation, we are also in the process of securing sketch credits for those who need those as well. Unfortunately, we have not received certification as of right now from EMU, Eastern Michigan University. And so I am not 100% certain that we will be able to offer sketches for this first session. But if you are interested in sketches, also please email me at that same address. Again, that's langel@miucp.org. Other things, if there are questions, please feel free to add them to the chat box throughout the presentation. And we have Tracy will be monitoring our chat box and hopefully addressing all questions. On that note, I'd like to show you, take you to our website and show you a quick video regarding MI-UCP. Just one moment. Okay, again, through the merging of UCP Detroit and UCP Michigan, we are now MI-UCP, Michigan United Cerebral Palsy. Our new website is MI-UCP.org. It is a great user-friendly website that provides information regarding all of our programs, our services, and our supports, in addition to the staff who are connected to those programs. Again, assistive technology is a huge focus of MI-UCP. We offer several programs. We have an assistive technology loan fund. We also implemented a new program, again, during the pandemic, a assistive technology lease to own program. We have a Bellows program where we are able to provide free grants for assistive technology. And again, our focus at MI-UCP is closing the disability divide. And again, we believe that we can do that by supporting people, by accessing resources, and by accessing technology. On that note, I'd like to just show a quick video that we have on our website.
For years, people with disabilities have been marginalized, ignored, and forgotten, too often being denied access to education, housing, and employment, leaving many struggling with financial stability and independence. All of this has created a disability divide. It's time for a change. We are MI-UCP, an organization dedicated to empowering Michiganders with disabilities. Everything we do, every day, is done to close the disability divide. Whether it takes the form of assistive technology or a portable wheelchair ramp, it could be significant benefits counseling, innovative therapy, parent training, advocacy, or simply being a trusted resource and a connection to others. At MI-UCP, we believe everyone has the right to live to the best of their abilities and go as far as their ambitions will take them. MI-UCP. Let's close the disability divide.
So thank you, everyone. That is the end of my intro. Again, I hope that you all enjoy the conference, and we look forward to hosting the monthly series. The series will be held on the second Monday of every month, except for July. I'm sorry, not Monday, the second Thursday of every month, except for July. We will be hosting on the second Friday due to the 4th of July holiday. I'd like to turn it over to Diane Dudash. Diane is going to introduce our presenter today, Mr. Thaddeus Hill. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Thaddeus Hill has earned his master's degree in education, is a licensed professional counselor, and has served in the United States Air Force. Mr. Hill recently retired from a very rewarding career with Detroit Public Schools, where he served as a paraprofessional, teacher, counselor, and administrator. Mr. Hill is certified in elementary education, special education, guidance and counseling, and administration. Please welcome Mr. Thaddeus Hill.
Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome. Let me get your PowerPoint pulled up.
I want to thank MI-UCP first for inviting me, and I also have to shout out to a couple of friends of mine who actually talked me into doing this. Doug and Karen Tibbs, if you're out there, I hope I don't embarrass myself and you too as well. But as an educator and as a special educator, I feel it's a good idea for me to keep my hand in and to share some ideas. Some you may agree with, some may be new to you, some just may be some things that reaffirm some things we know about education. I will try to stay as close to PowerPoint as possible, but the PowerPoint is kind of an outline for myself and some ideas for you to think about as we go along. Contemporary events, which I tried to stay away from because one of the focuses on that is things change. We know that. What we seldom are prepared for, however, is how quickly and how drastically they can change. Add to that the daunting challenge of adapting to a contemporary life, the obstacle of a disability. I must say that requires enviable strength, courage, and coping skills heretofore unheard of. That's just me reading the PowerPoint. As a special education teacher, I've always found my students who face physical challenges to be the more mature and the ones that I took inspiration from, because they have already faced so many challenges in life. They just come to the table with so much more maturity than the rest of us who don't face those challenges. So I won't be addressing their challenges directly, as I will talk to them and those of us who support them, and those of us who can gather information on how to help them as well as ourselves cope with a contemporary society that is in constant flux and coping with some current events that just have most of us just going, wow, what just happened? And this is more of a educational philosophical presentation, because technology just can't be viewed as the hardware. Technology is the software, the actual concept of education. And education has a purpose. Education is to teach us to cope with society and its daily challenges. A lot of the focus will be on this, will be focused on an author from a couple of decades or more than a couple of decades back, and about change. And we'll get to that in the next slide, and which we can go to now, if you will, Diane. Thank you. It's called Future Shock. And although that's been out for a while, I'm a comic book collector, I'm a science fiction fan, and Future Shock, Mr. Toffler's work, has been the closest thing of wedding what we would call science fiction and just good, sound educational concepts. But what Future Shock is, and you can read it along with me, is defined as the shattering stress and disorientation that is induced in an individual when they're subject to too much change in too short a time. We've all had that feeling where in our culture lately, things have just happened so fast that we find that we have difficulty in just coping with them. And education itself, knowledge gathering and knowledge and information distribution in and of itself is a technology, not so much the hardware, because as we know, all hardware needs software to run it. And our brain is the hardware. Education is the software. I've often said as an educator in a classroom that nature gives all living individuals and all species tools. Bears have claws, lions and tigers have teeth. We don't have strong teeth, strong claws. I break more fingernails opening a can of pop than I can trying to survive. But we have a tool. It has always been my secret belief as an educator that that tool is our mind. And what we do as educators, and for those who offer support services or assistance to those of us who face challenges in living, is to teach us how to use those tools. I think it was Margaret Mead that said, education is not telling you what to think. Education is teaching you how to think. And it's always been my goal as an educator to teach each individual, no matter what their challenges or what their perspective, how to use their individual tool to the best of their ability and to live up to their potential. But what some of the challenges we face is that future shock. If we look around us, we see the condition of future shock can affect institutions, societies, cultures. And while I'll avoid speaking to any direct events, we can all see around us those events that we face on a daily basis that just cause us to deal with future shock. My perspective on education will be that, truthfully speaking, how can we prepare our family, ourselves, our students, and all the people in our own individual support systems, how to adapt and how to live in a culture that we really don't know what it's going to look like. And Diane, thank you. We can go on to the next slide. So historically speaking, Toffler always talks about societies and cultures in a series of waves. And we're just going to touch on the first two so we can define the basis of this presentation will be mostly focused on the third. The first wave was humans transitioned from hunters, gatherers to a agricultural society. This is when we first see human culture really begin to take off and develop. The second wave was called the industrial age. We spent a lot of time in the industrial age. It was characterized by factories, mass education, which I'm going to talk about. Here's where we see the rise of technology. I'll just say one of my peeves with the industrial age, for all its modernization and all of its innovation and for its push in human evolution, as an educator, I had one problem with the industrial age, and especially industrial age education. I became a special educator because the industrial age type of education, I would casually say, in mainstream classroom, the focus was, I would jokingly say, well, if it's 2:00 on Tuesday, we must be on page 97. That's not how education works. It worked all right for automobiles on an assembly line. It does not work well for individuals. I also put forth that most innovation in education began in special ed and then spread out into gen ed. But we're faced with a recent development in human evolution where we talk about the third wave. The third wave is a transition from the industrial age with its uniformity and mass production and mechanization of society into what we refer to as the information age. I think you can go back and look, I think it's Jane Bluestein who did a lot of work about informational age versus industrial age schools. There's a lot of differences in that. And the transition to the industrial age, from the industrial age into the information age, is what we're seeing a lot of now. And a lot of the tension in society now is the culture as a whole having the difficulty transitioning into the information age. Diane, we can move on, please. Now, the information age. And once again, I want to stress that we want to look at education itself as a technology, as a coping mechanism. because we're transitioning from a society with technology to a society of technology. And it's characterized, look around, it's high-speed communication, globalization, individual access to communication, and just the overall, not so much a reliance on technology as much as an integration of technology in just about everything we do. Downstairs, I think my coffee maker has a computer chip in it. But according to Toffler, and this was some of the basis about future shock, and throughout this presentation, each individual can think for themselves examples of some of the concepts I'm putting forth. So as information age grew, you see that manufacturing goods are being eclipsed by knowledge production and information processing as the primary economic activity. And how many of us said knowledge is power? Well, I think as educators and as people who are parts of the support system for other human beings, we need to expand and continually expand our ability to process information, because even some of the problems I'm facing in this presentation was when I wrote this presentation, the actual writing of the presentation, by the time it was finished, it was almost obsolete. Next slide, please. So I like to think I come up with the concepts. They may be new to you, they may not. I think I coined the phrase lifelong transition. And I think I invented the phrase individual infrastructure being a current buzzword. But I did my master's thesis on transition, and I like to say that the old concept of transition is just obsolete. It was always thought of transition was school to work. And similar seminars such as this one, I've always made the assertion that any life change is a transition. If I move a block from where I'm living now, if I'm working, my commute to work changes. That's a transition. If I move my office from where it presently is to down the hall, that's a transition. Life itself is a transition. And what is education if not but teaching the adaptability to face transition? So we're looking at lifelong transition. Transitioning should be a lifelong skill because things just change too quick. Our plan of attack, our tactics for daily living become obsolete so quick if we're not skilled at adapting and transitioning. Because what is learning in and of itself but transitioning? And while the concept of a support system, and I don't mean to minimize support systems because we're all part of somebody else's support system, and hopefully everybody who my voice is reaching now is part of my support system, and I'd like to be part of theirs. But it's just kind of limited. So pulling terms from current news feeds, I come up with individualized infrastructure. It's kind of a support system on steroids. It's your individual design for your life, your individual infrastructure. And so the focus of this will be on these two concepts. How do we use lifelong transition skills in order to build, maintain, and if necessary, modify our own individual infrastructures. Next slide, please. So what does a evolving individualized infrastructure, what's it based on? What looks like sound lifelong transition planning? Well, in order to answer that, we need these 5 questions. These are the basic questions about anything: who, what, where, when, and why. And any type of planning, any type of life management, any type of crisis management, any type of transition, first of all, you need to make sound decisions based on answering those 5 questions. So in sound transition planning, first you want to ask who? Who's the network? Who's the support system? Because my support system just changed. MI-UCP just become part of the support system. It evolves. My network has grown. Because we must face an ever diverse and ever more inclusive society. Just because of globalization, because of the information age, the type of people, fortunately and happily for us, is constantly expanding. As an educator, I was constantly awed by, especially being a special education, I was constantly awed by the skills and diversities and just the wide range of different life stories that I faced as a special educator. It constantly made me evolve as a human being. So as part of Future Shock, we find that the who around us evolves constantly. So what? So what is the purpose of transition planning? It's goal setting. It's problem solving. Sometimes it even involves crisis management. And it's based on third wave education. One of the things I liked about Toffler, and I'll mention something else as well, but one quote of his directly was, according to Toffler, the 21st literate is someone who can learn, unlearn, and relearn. One of the problems in society as we evolve, as we become a more diverse and inclusive and democratic society, we find some of the things, and yes, I will say some of the things we were taught in public education, but some of the things we were taught to believe culturally just don't seem to be true. Some of the things, one of the biggest obstacles in education is unlearning what we've learned. Or as I like to say, every time I think I have the answers, someone changes the questions. So transitioning, lifelong transitioning, means what problems we are solving, what crises we're facing are constantly evolved. And just, I'm sorry, but industrial age education just doesn't really focus on innovative thinking. Where? That's a question with globalization. And I don't know what statistics are, what the numbers say. That'd be a research project for anyone who'd like to take it up. But we're fine, excuse me, we find we become a more mobile society. In fact, some of the statistics show that even just in the United States, our form of government is changing because they're finding that more people are migrating away from the Northeast toward Southern United States and the Western United States. And it may be something to think about, someone with challenges. We've all heard of the people who have retired and moved to Arizona because it's just good for asthma or just good for anybody with allergies. And as a global society, we've all know people who have retired out of the country. We're just more mobile. So geographic and residential considerations become part of the decision-making process. Take for instance, there's going to be a issue with climate refugees. And I'm just throwing that out there as a problem that we face now that we haven't previously given a lot of consideration to. So where is an aspect of decision-making that previously we didn't? I think a large portion of the population, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I think they lived most of their lives between somewhere around 25 to 50 miles from where they were born. That's just not the case. People move. And in a global society, people move far and wide. So we always want to keep our options open, that in any decision-making process, the solution may be just to go somewhere else, vocationally, educationally, residentially, and for your peace of mind. You might want to move just because you live in the mountains and you want to move by the sea. One of the main problems with future shock is the concept, the question of when. And I'll read, we are ever facing more rapidly changing dates and deadlines with increasingly obsolete data and dogma. And I spoke to that question a little earlier. Even in the writing of this presentation, just watching current events, I said, well, I want to address that. I want to address that. I want to address that. The very next day, current events change so rapidly. I said, oh no, I'll throw that out, throw that out, because it's not the case anymore. And I won't dwell on dogma or belief systems, but true education will force us to look at things differently from what we may have been taught. Deadlines come and go. Dates, and this may be related to just my age or something, but it just seems time moves faster. And that's a symptom of future shock. The future is arriving long before we're prepared for it. So we want to look at lifelong transitioning skills as a way to cope with a future that's constantly arriving much quicker than we prepare ourselves for. And we just cannot do it trying to make decisions in the 21st century based on a 20th century education, because, quote unquote, the rules just no longer apply. And we don't have time to mull over things as long as we would like to. Sometimes we have to make decisions because things change so quickly, and anybody can offer any number of current events where something happened that affected their lifestyle almost immediately. And I'm not even going to begin to try to list those, because there's some individual changes as well as cultural changes that education just doesn't prepare us for. We have to make transitions. So we want to approach our lifestyle, our individual, our construction of our individual infrastructure So we already have resources in place to cope with events that we just couldn't predict. And finally, we go to why. Of course, the why is to improve the quality of life. I don't want to be as morbid or as gloomy as to say to survive. We'd like to believe that as we mature as a society, the quality of life becomes more important, and just as important as just the concept of staying alive. Because then this is another quote from Toffler. I like that guy. Our moral responsibility is not only to meet the future, but to shape it and I like this, and to channel our destiny in a humane direction and to ease the trauma of transition. The core of that is, as members of society, part of our life goal should be to try to make society better as a whole, or just to contribute to human evolution being the evolution of the human spirit, the evolution of empathy, the evolution of us as a whole instead of as individual cogs in the wheel. Next slide, please. So I'm getting through this rather quickly, and it shows what I was talking about. This is going a lot quicker than I changed, and excuse me if I'm stumbling, but hopefully there'll be time for questions as I ask, but I want to put the concepts out so that we look at education as the process of using lifelong transition to establish, maintain, and to renovate individualized infrastructures so that we can be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And so how do we know if we're getting it right? How do we know if we've checked all the boxes, who, what, where, when, and why? So I'm pretty sure that I can cope with today. And if something comes up tomorrow that I wasn't prepared with, I kind of got the resources in place that I can adapt my living tactics to cope with whatever change that day brings. And hopefully do something good for somebody else too. So I'm gonna kind of switch philosophers here. Another guy that I kind of like was a Russian educator named Alexander Godinsky. I always mispronounce his name, but he's also my guy. And he laid out what's called a cycle of competence. As a therapist, when I did individual therapy, I would kind of let my clients lay out or look at the 4 C's, which is part of Godinsky's cycle of competence. His view was, as a functioning individual, there are 4 conditions or 4 concepts that need to be addressed in order to have what my sociology professor as an undergrad used to call problems of living. And the 4 C's are basically conditions. What we want to do is create a physically and emotionally safe environment. And everybody who's familiarized with Maslow in classrooms, we always understood that a need must be met before we could talk about a want. Children couldn't be, a hungry child is not thinking about education. A hungry child is thinking about eating. What we're finding and what is just making the hairs on my arm stand up is more and more we're finding people aren't feeling emotionally safe. And I would propose that a lot of the incidents of outbreaks of violence can stem from people who didn't feel like they were emotionally safe. So we need to create a physical and emotionally safe environment. You have to feel healthy physically and emotionally before you can do any kind of transitional work or goal setting, problem solving, or crisis management. One of the things we see lacking now too is the second C. An individual must have a sense of control in their own lives. And once again, we see a lot of the conditions of turmoil that we are facing in present culture are just because people don't feel in control of their own lives. And of course, there's connectedness. The need for a meeting such as this, because circumstances has dictated that the very thing that holds us together, the closeness of human society, had become a problem to our physical well-being. So what we're facing now is more and more a challenge in the quality of our lives based on our feel of connectedness. And what we call it COVID fever, and this is the only time I'll mention, I tried not to mention one specific aspect, but in terms of connectedness, we're in a culture now where our feeling of connectedness is strained to near, for some, past the breaking point. So we must figure out a way in building our individual infrastructures that we take into account the need for connectedness. We need to feel like we belong. We need to feel like there is something like MI-UCP in our lives that we feel connected to, that makes us feel part of a group. And the final C for creating an effective, individualized infrastructure is contribution. Part of the reason for sound emotional and mental health is we need to feel we're contributing. One could say a lot of lofty things about contribution, and I'm not going to read this, but I could. So how about this? You're contributing to society just by being the kind of person other people don't mind being around. If we have empathy, your contribution just may be, and I use the example of an administrator I used to work for. She would always tell me that when you see the kids in the morning, smile, because that smile be the only smile they see that day. You contributed to that person's well-being just by smiling. You help create an emotionally safe environment. By smiling, you're letting that individual know that you got this. You help give them a sense of control. Of course, the added connectedness, just by being the kind of person in a society with, I don't know how many billions of people that are on the earth now. I'm sure it was 6 million last week, or it might be 8 million this week. One of those data changes that we're going to have to face it. There are more people, and we're more close together, and we rub up against each other in myriad ways. So let's not be sand in the works. Let's be the lubrication of human culture and the growth of society as a whole. We want to contribute. One of the ways you can contribute is just not being a jerk. And you never know whose day that may have made better, or what mass catastrophe you may have forestalled just by treating someone who is feeling isolated and disconnected, who didn't have any control, your contribution to them might have been the thing that stopped them from having that traumatic episode that proves traumatic for them and society as a whole and causes more funerals. You may never know what one small word or one contribution to the well-being of another human being may have done. So these are the things I think are the software to go, the technology of education, the software that goes into an evolving human being in an ever-changing contemporary society. And I'd like to finish with a final thought. There's a lot of her work that, and no, I'm not going to sing because, spoiler alert, I can't sing. But I've always been a lover of profound musical lyrics. And one of the final thought is, I believe any dream that I want to, that is the only way of keeping hope alive. And if by chance I give birth to my visions, life is so fantastic, it would come as no surprise. That's from the singer Minnie Riperton. And the title of that song is Adventures in Paradise. And given all our challenges, with the right frame of mind, with the right kind of transitional planning, with the right individual infrastructure in place, we can begin to feel, those of us with physical, mental, emotional challenges, we need for them to understand that those of us who aren't labeled as having special challenges, even though we all know we all have our own special challenges, we're just not diagnosed. We can help them feel like they're as just as much an important part, not only of present day society, but moving us to a future with an increased ability for ourselves and those around us to cope with the change and to go forward with the belief that whatever changes they may be facing, there are ways, and we as members of their support system can bring resources to bear or supply them with resources that help them contribute to a brighter future for us all. I think that's it. Any questions?
Tracy, are there any questions?
There are not.
Okay.
Is anyone, we'll give you a couple minutes if you'd like to put questions in the chat. We'd be happy to have Mr. Hill address those. I do have a comment from Cynthia Patton Johnson, who says, "Thank you, Mr. Hill, great presentation." Another one from Lindsay Marcellus, "Very inspiring. Thank you so much for speaking." Anyone else have questions or comments? Sorry that you weren't around when I was growing up in Detroit, is from Marguerite. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Marguerite. Elaine Ross says, "Thank you. I enjoyed the presentation, very uplifting." Amy Stablin says, "Thank you."
Karen has a question, Karen Tibbs.
Oh, I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
It's under the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
What's your question, Karen? Not seeing it.
It was there. Also, Diane, sidebar. Will I get a copy of this recording? I don't know if I want to look at it. I'm probably going to cringe throughout trying to watch it.
No, you won't. It was great. Yeah, I'll have Leslin send you a copy once we figure out how to do that.
There's another one. Thank you. That was interesting and informative from Dolores. And someone says, still growing and educating all those who will listen. So that's the comments that have come in since then. Oh, there are Q&A. Hold on one moment. Let me go over there. Lori says, hello, I have so enjoyed your presentation. I teach cultures of gentleness and I see how aligned your philosophy is with that. I appreciate you and your work. Thank you. And then Karen says, can you speak a little about the program where the student went to BS/BS? I may be wrong about the program.
What program, Karen? Actually, because in one of the video that was initially showed, I actually saw one of my former students, I believe, but I see former students everywhere.
She says, I mean Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Oh, yes. That was a project called Project Search, which had the highest number of students, went from a OJT type setting to becoming actual employees. In fact, the person used to run it, Miss Shorter and I were friends, and I used to do their graduations almost on a yearly basis because for some reason people seem to think some of my jokes are funny. But I used to speak at their graduations, and I would always say that they had a placement percentage of 95%. And she would always correct me and saying that they had a placement of 97%. But it's an example of transitioning where the school becomes the setting. We actually designed some of the transition centers for Detroit Public Schools to include what's called immersive learning. And the program at Blue Cross Blue Shield was a symptom of immersive learning. How do you learn to work? By going to work and learning what's the best environment to learn how to work in the workplace. So using that as sort of a template, we actually design, and there are some all over the country. There's one here in Taylor, and I think Friendship Circle is a sample of immersive learning, where you design a living environment to train people how to live. We had apartments and we had kitchens, and you want to teach somebody how to cook, it's done in the kitchen. So expanding on that, let's look at society and culture in general as sort of a simulated learning environment, even though it's real. So take everything as a learning experience, because every decision you make today is preparing you for the decisions you're going to have to make tomorrow. So every day we're still in class. Whether we know it or not, every day is class. And what we need to do as support people and educators is try to help people make decisions that we can't possibly know exist right now, because I'll share this. Anybody who'll say they have a really firm grasp of what our culture is going to look like next month, 6 months from now, a year from now, is really not telling you the truth, because we really don't have a clue. We're hoping that it'll be what becomes eventually to be our culture is similar to what we like to believe. But we're just not equipped, and we aren't equipping our students to envision what their life is going to be like. And so Project Search was one of the projects of, if we want to help kids make the transition into a work environment, let them practice first. Let them go to work, have trainers at work. And quite frankly, we have it for people who have other symptoms of physical and mental challenge. We call them job trainers or job coaches, where they go to, your teacher goes to work with you. There's nothing wrong with that. Some of the things I do in life, I love to play tennis. I wish I could take a trainer or a teacher with me every time I get out of the court so I won't look so foolish. But yeah, Project Search is one of any number of innovative approaches to education. And thanks, Karen, for asking, because it's always been my contention. And one of the reasons for me to do things like that is we have an excellent opportunity to redesign education as we know it. Because like I've always been, and here I am up on my soapbox again, assembly line education just does not work. And thank you, Ms. Patton Johnson, for pointing out that the Project Search person was a dear friend of mine. And I like to point to the people who have helped me evolve and some of the people who are the true innovators. And I certainly think Ms. Shorter, Franklin Shorter is one of them, as well as Doug and Karen, and Ms. Johnson, who is also one of my mentors.
Lovely. Somebody says, thank you for this presentation. My son is 14. He has autism. We have discussions daily about his transitioning into adulthood. He wants to work and go to college. Somebody else said, Project Search, great program for students. Somebody else, that is a wonderful quote, every day is a class. And learning from each, learning from each, they are educating tomorrow. And then somebody put Lakeisha Franklin Shorter's project director for Project Search, Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah, we all have people who around us. And one of the things we need to look at in terms of educational structure, education cannot be a top-down concept. We are learning that education is more lateral than vertical. We learn from the people around us, not from the people over us, or we just not teach. I learn a lot from my students. I had one of my first classes, when I first started working with the hearing impaired, one of the ways I got one of my students involved was his job was to teach me a certain number of signs per week. And I learned. But in that instance, he became the teacher and I become the student, and there's nothing wrong with that. I also learned, and that's why I really have a soft spot for this particular population, because like I said earlier, I found that some of my most emotionally stable and more mature students were the ones who had physical challenges because they grew up problem solving, they grew up facing challenges, and they just became more stable people from it. So we learn from those around us. We learn, like part of my PowerPoint was people with disabilities exhibit the kind of courage. And quite frankly, I have to admit, some of my students, the challenges they face on a daily basis, I don't know if I could have done it.
Jody says, thank you for this presentation. It was thought-provoking. And then Marguerite says, everyone has different ways of learning.
Yeah, that's what's at special education. And we look back, almost all of the innovations in mainstream education first began in special ed. And I really believe that the concept of a transition plan, everybody in mainstream, why don't people who are graduating from high school have a transition plan? Are you planning on what you're doing next? What's the plan? Do we have a transition plan or the kids going from middle school to high school? Are they having transition planning? Or do we just, does the assembly line just roll on?
Does anyone have any final question they'd like to ask? All right, lovely. Well, Mr. Hill, thank you so much for your presentation today. Obviously, it was very inspiring for folks, and that's wonderful to hear. We so appreciate your taking the time to do this for us. My name is Tracy Strading. I'm the Michigan Assistive Technology Program Manager with MI-UCP. And in our next session, I invite you all to join us as we learn from Makia Alexander about iPad apps for accessibility. You'll find Makia to be dynamic, exciting, and organized. She serves as the Assistive Technology Coordinator for Ann Arbor Public Schools. In that position, she supports assistive technology acquisition, application, design, and training. Makia describes her passion about sharing what she has learned because every position she's ever held has prepared her for all the things she does to assist her child who struggles and uses these types of tools to learn. She's going to present how to access and customize vision, mobility, and cognitive features. I'm looking forward to learning from her next month, and we invite you to join us for that session on Thursday, June 10th at 10 a.m. So thank you again, and we appreciate your attendance and attention.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you for having me. I hope I help somebody understand. Well,
I think you did for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rosalind, any final thoughts?
Thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Also, while we were starting the session this morning, I received confirmation that we are able to offer sketches for today. So again, please don't forget to email me for information regarding the sketch credit at my-ucp.org. Also, if you would like a certificate of participation, please feel free to email me as well. Have a great day, and until next month, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.